Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone tuning in. My name is Matt Miller, room tilter here at Limitless Minds, coming to you live from St. Louis, Missouri. So I'm on Central Time here, 11:30. And today, we used to call it Transformational Tuesday, but with my friend that I'm going to bring on, the topic today is from bleeding to building. How's that for a catchphrase, right? From bleeding to building. And so without further ado, I'm going to bring my new friend on, Hubert. There he is. There's Hubert. And three things about Hubert. He's a husband. He's a dad to many.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But most importantly, what I learned real quick is he's a friend to many. And I complimented him before this call, before we went live. I've used you as an example a lot, Hubert, that leaning into all of your talents. I've used you as an example to my kids. And so I just can't thank you enough for who you are, how you serve. And I'm just blessed to be with you today. So thank you for.
Appreciate that, buddy. I'm excited to be here, man. Every conversation we've had has been getting a bigger fire and a bigger fire. So I'm excited to be here, man.
Continue to change lives. So we were challenged a little bit, full disclosure on coming up with titles, and you and I weren't very good at like getting this out early to really get the marketing behind it. But I love the topic and what we're going to talk about today. So if you'll lean into why we kind of named this from bleeding to building and what started this conversation.
Yeah. So I'm really big on, man, our mindset can be a weapon. And we can look at one situation from different sides, and it can either fuel us or tear us down. This past weekend, I was playing in California in a desert somewhere, a little big town, and I've been playing drums for a long time. So when it came to the show, it was pretty easy for me to kind of put on a certain face and muscle memory my way through it. And I got off the stage, and one of the artists walked up to me, and he's like, "Hubert, what's going on, man? I feel like you're disconnected or disengaged. Great performance, but like off the stage and the in-between time, something's taking up all your energy." And I looked at him, and most of me was appreciative of how he called me out. But man, I actually was really glad that he asked me, because I just wanted to throw up all the things that were in my heart and in my head. And it made me think, man, there are a lot of us who we're making everything about everything. And we might be overwhelmed with, like for me, I knew I had a few big business meetings coming up this week. I was meeting with a previous employer on Thursday. I got another meeting, and got to take care of my family. I got to fly back across the country and all these things. And before he asked me, all those things were just jumbled up and taking up all my attention and resources. And I realized, like, man, I need a process. I need to stop the bleeding. And by stopping the bleeding, I mean spending time with myself and understanding what's really going on, getting really focused and specific on what my concerns are, where I'm feeling disconnected, and then coming up with a process to kind of work through it so I can be present, right? So I can be in the moment and enjoy my family, or enjoy my coworkers, or enjoy, being in a beautiful desert in California. So I feel like it'd be a cool topic for us to dive in today.
And when we were brainstorming last week and just talking about this, I'm like, who cannot relate to exactly what you just described, right? Like the average person wakes up, literally jumps on the treadmill of life, it speeds up, it inclines, buzz through the day, trying to be present with everything, get to the end of the day, exhausted, wake up, do it again. And then weeks fly by and we're trapped in that. Like you said, if everything's important, nothing's important.
That's right.
So how are we really analyzing, and what a tribute to, and I know we're going to talk about this in kind of our three steps, is to have somebody that looked at you and said, "Hey, what's up?"
Yeah.
To make sure that we're surrounding ourselves with people that have the courage, and then there's enough trust there that they look at you and be like, "Hey man, what's up?
Yep.
What's going on?"
Yep.
And so I love that we're using this analogy today. You hear bleeding and be like, "Whoa, wow, that," but like, it's true. It's true, right? Like there's areas of us that are, if we don't as we are going to talk about, apply some pressure. And I'm a little I love the topic also. My son's a paramedic firefighter here in St. Louis, and so
Yeah.
can't wait to tell him about, hey, we used one of your literally, not an analogy, but what you do on a weekly basis. So
Absolutely.
so 3 steps. So let's jump into them, man. What's
Yes.
number one?
So the first one is it's important to identify where we're bleeding, right? And you had a great graphic. Can we bring that graphic up? The different places where we can bleed financially, spiritually, emotionally, physically, relationally, and professionally. Um, the crazy thing is, if we're bleeding in one of those areas, Matt, how many times have you been bleeding in one of those areas and it made everything blurry, right?
Right.
You're dealing with the work situation and you come home and you're kind of showing up the same way. Different people, same response, right? So we know if we're bleeding, the first thing you want to do is you want to secure the wound and you want to put pressure on it. And the way that I link that to the process of how we walk through this thing is, if we're putting pressure on a wound, right, you want to spend time figuring out, where am I bleeding, right? If it's emotionally, you can dive into your internal environment, spend time with yourself and figure out, man, what's the message that's coming up from my disconnection, right? And that will help you get awareness around what you can do next, your next right step, right? So that's the first step. I love to hear your thoughts on that, Matt.
Well, 2 things. Number one, every time I use that visual in coaching, like, where are we going to start? The average person says, all of them.
Yeah.
I got to do better with my physical activity, emotionally. Haven't been to church in a while. Like, they just start going. I'm like, whoa, time out. What do we talk about? Multitasking. If everything's important, nothing's important. Multitasking, we don't do anything well. And so I love where you're talking about is identify one. And we talk about that at Limitless Minds, identifying. We use the term noticing, right? Like, okay, in these 6, where's the one I need to start? And there's a lot of different visuals out there that people use. I like this one because it kind of does at least give us a place to start. But to your point, you're a dad of 6. I'm a dad of 3. I know everybody tuning in is not a parent, but it reminds me, especially when the kids were little, until you had a plan on what the kids were doing, like, nothing else mattered, right? Like,
hey man,
like
yes,
that started the whole circle of everything, of what mom, dad, whoever's involved. Same thing here. When one of these is out of whack, we have to apply that pressure, identify it, get that to stop bleeding. And it reminds me of, our dear friend Trevor Moad. It wasn't so much of saying yes to one more thing, it's saying no. And like, stopping that bleeding and so forth. So I love that first piece of, okay, identify that one area that you're bleeding in, and struggling in, and let's apply pressure to it to go to step 2.
Yeah. So I'm gonna add one thing, because that's awesome, man. I struck a chord with me about the kids. Got to have a plan. What this enables us to do right off the bat is lower our anxiety. So when our anxiety lowers, our creativity gets higher, right? It's like a seesaw. So if I'm identifying where I have a pain point, where I'm bleeding, I'm becoming more resourceful, I'm engaging my creativity, and my anxiety is lowering, right? Because I got the beginning of a plan at least. Now, step 2, super important. If someone's bleeding, you've already secured the wound. You want to call 911. You want to recruit the right resources you need. Now, the thing about resources, in our context, those resources can be external resources, right? So who's on your team? Who do you trust to hold you accountable? Who do you trust now that you know where you're bleeding, right? If you're financially bleeding, go speak to someone you trust in that area, right? If it's emotional, go speak to someone in that area. So 911, we are recruiting our team, and that's our second step. Another important point about recruiting our team, we can also recruit internal resources, right? So a lot of times when I'm coaching, it comes up. A lot of people just aren't even aware that they've built a discipline muscle in another area of their life. And we can resource that to help us in different areas, right? You may need to resource more compassion. You may need to resource some forgiveness, right? So calling 911, calling in troops, finding your people is a huge step in stopping the bleeding.
So I'm sitting here like scribbling and so forth as because I love this process because you put a couple people in a room and then it's just like the synergy that happens
Yeah,
from
man.
that. So
Yeah.
I want to rewind for a second because you talked about anxiety and
Mhm.
that teeter totter of when you lower it, creativity goes up. And I
Mhm.
saw a quote the other day in my morning reading that says the opposite of being anxious is being present.
That's good.
And so, and
Good.
we know the farther we get into the future, that's where anxiety hangs out, right? And
Mhm.
so, bringing ourselves back to where our feet are and being
Yep.
present
Yep.
is the first step of realizing what that piece is. And another thing that I thought about when you were just saying that is there's an area of the circle that actually there's a part of you and me that I know is true is we probably should have start with what's one that's going really well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Start with the positive. We kind of went to the bleeding, which I
Yeah.
love that piece of it.
Yeah.
But to your point that you're talking about is there's probably one that's going pretty well.
That's right.
And to give the James Clear, he's probably been the most quoted person over the last year with Atomic Habits. It's like start with where you have a good habit and habit stack from there. And
Mhm.
so, leaning on your strength, but then that whole piece of calling in people, I think sometimes we think that one person is the all encompassing, and there's people I'll lean on for one thing, but boy, not for another, right?
That's right.
And so, to your point, once you identify what that area is, then who are those people that I can call on to be like, hey, help me out here, I'm stuck.
That's right. That's right. That's why it really helps us to get specific about where we need help so we can get proper support. How many times I know a lot of times I've called the wrong person for the wrong kind of pain, right? Or I've leaned into things that soothe my pain that don't really serve me. And it's a longer conversation, but man, I've been doing a ton of studying on addiction and just kind of giving addiction more dynamics. It's not just drugs, right? It's really any time that we have a short term benefit, but it's a long term. It takes from us, right? And it's things that we do, and this is very important to kind of get control of those types of things that are running our lives every day. The more specific we get, we can organize our energy and pack a tighter punch.
Yeah.
So,
And what we're getting to as people are tuning in, I see our buddy Lane is in here. It is all about identifying. It goes back to your quote of was it everything? No, the
don't make everything about everything,
right. Yeah,
right?
exactly. And it's the same thing. If everything's important, nothing's important. So
Yeah.
as we go into the day, the more where we lower our anxiety, to your point, is getting clear on as I look at my to-do list and it's a mile long, I can't do everything today on Tuesday,
That's
right?
right.
But I know what my most important is. So can I circle two or three most important things, make sure they're showing up in my calendar, and be good with knowing that I accomplished those. And so again, as we talk about skills to lower anxiety, it's making the to-do list each week, right?
Yeah.
And spreading that out to make sure that the most important is showing up each day, but not every day, right? Because
Yeah.
then nothing's important. And so
Yeah.
I love that piece. And what I know is true, and especially males, is we don't ask for help. You know,
Struggle with that, right?
we all struggle with it, even you and I, right? And so to
Mhm.
have that courage to make that phone call and be like, hey, or text or whatever, to be like, hey, I need some help is key.
Yeah, I love this because what we're doing is we're creating a culture, right? It's not just a one-time process and I flip the switch and I'm good. It's a culture of being able to compartmentalize good and bad things. It's a culture of spending time with yourself and calling in adequate help, right? And all this is going to do is build more trust and make you more efficient in the way that you show up at home, at work, and with yourself.
Yep. And I think I don't say this in a negative connotation, but I think people are just so trapped in the busy that they're just kind of unconsciously selfish, and they're just unconscious, like just kind of going through the day and letting the day drive them. And I don't know about you, you and I get to spend a ton of space helping others and doing a
Mhm.
lot of listening. I can count on one hand the times somebody's looked at me and said, "But how about you, man? Are you good?" And I say that because I was on a coaching call last week. That hasn't happened to me in a long time. And all of a sudden, this person was like caring enough to be like, "Well, tell me what's going on with you." And I'm like, "No, no,
Mhm.
no, this is about you," and so forth. But
Yeah.
like, you reminded me when we were talking the other day about how like we need to model that and continually be that person that's checking on others like that,
Yep.
because then at some point that will empower others to do the same in their circle of people as well.
Yeah. I think that's healthy leadership. I think what you're speaking to that's real healthy leadership, right? Um, like I'm always referring to our relationship with our own internal environment and our parts, and it's not about us just telling our parts how to behave and then resourcing. There needs to be a mutual relationship of listening as well, right? And 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 for that to go the best, you got to show up and just be transparent yourself. And we all got to have someone that's just, we feel like is in our corner, man. No one's out here bulletproof and can operate without help.
No,
So
absolutely.
I love
You
that.
you keep yeah, that's the third or fourth time I've heard about parts work. We have a little bit of time. Can you unpack, because we showed the pieces of the pie, so to say, and so forth, and the 6 areas, and then you reference like this parts work. Can you connect that a little bit to what we're talking about today?
Yeah, so I'd love to. I believe that, well, I use this methodology that your internal environment is multiple parts. Our parts are patterns. Have you ever felt like, okay, here's a situation. I got a part of me that's like, man, I'm gonna get this done. Then there's another part that's like, I really don't want to. I don't feel like it. I don't think it serves us. Then you got a whole other part that might be shaming the whole system, right? So this interaction of parts, when they don't agree, that's when we feel disconnect. That's when we feel like we're bleeding out, right? Now, our parts are not running rogue. They have different jobs. We all have an undamaged healing center as well. And what I mean by that is, before you were told you can't do that, too short, not smart enough, or you saw yourself maybe did not accomplish a certain goal, before you took in all that negative messaging, there was this childlike spirit of belief that you can do anything, right? And that's always there and it's unfazed by anything you see. So the goal of parts work is not to ignore your parts, because that's how you know where you're bleeding. That's how you know where to do the work. You want to um, you want to stop them from overworking and kind of right size them in your system,
Mhm.
like turn down the volume a little bit, and you want them to operate through that undamaged healing center. So just some words so you know when you're operating from your undamaged parts, from your undamaged healing center, when you're creative, when you're compassionate, when you're curious, when you're choosing that curiosity over being judgmental, when we're calm. Those are all words that exude. I'm operating from that healing center, and not a part who's thrust into a role, right? That role is because when we have parts that are thrust in a roles, it looks like a trauma response. We have a defensive posture. We show up with automatic response. We may respond to people like past relationships. I got a whole new partner, but I'm responding to my new partner like my old partner because they look like the enemy, right? And the thing about parts work, it gives us a way to say, wait a minute, what parts do I have running rogue that are bleeding out, right? What parts do I have that I kind of need to reparent and right size through that undamaged healing center? Where do I need to do work? Now, I use this for healing work. I also use it for performance work. right? So if I'm a quarterback, football player, 2-minute game, I don't want my parts making decisions for me. I want to be, like you said earlier, Matt, mindful and present where my feet are so I can read whatever's happening to make the best decision. And the only way I can do that is if I have a way to organize my internal environment where I can say, that part, that's not reality right now. That part is in a role that's has been thrust into to protect me, right? But I'm not gonna just make my decisions based on that, right? So we do that work before our performance moment, but the parts work is just an awesome way to organize our internal environment so we can show up in relationship in the most healthy way possible.
I'm so glad I just asked you to go a little further into that because I already made a bunch of notes and so forth. But it just reminds me, those of you tuning in, like what he described is as you look at your day, hour by hour, there's different things that each hour is calling on you.
Mm-hmm.
What is my intention and what part needs to show up at that time? Because at this hour, man, I need to be courageous and I need to make sure that that part of me is really speaking up. But then at the next session, it might be I just need to sit back and listen, right? I
Mm-hmm.
I need to tap into that part that's just going to be more considerate than courageous, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I love that you reminded us about kids. It's why I spent the first 25 years as a elementary principal running around with 4 to 10 year olds because they just see the world in a cool, awesome,
Yeah.
optimistic spot, right?
Yeah, man.
And
Yeah,
it's our job just to tap into their genius and
that's right.
what they're great at and lean into that and don't try to make them anything else other than who they are. And
That's
so
right.
anyway, that's a whole nother piece. So let's go into the last piece. So we talked about identifying one, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
multiple, but applying pressure to that one area that we are, to use the analogy, bleeding out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Second piece is within that area, who is
Mm-hmm.
somebody that we can lean on? We know we can't do it by ourselves, right? We can try, but it's going to take a lot longer, and we're stuck with only our genius and not the genius of others. So
Mm-hmm.
calling that 911 in. And so what's the third, Hubert?
So supporting the injury, right? If it's for an example, if I'm bleeding out of my arm, then I've applied pressure. I've called 911. You may see me with a sling, right? I heard an awesome analogy earlier this week, and then I did some research behind when does a wound start healing, right? It actually starts healing right away. The process, our blood starts clotting, and the analogy was, a scar. A lot of times we'll have people that say, "Hey, see, this is where I was hurt. I got a big one on my hand. My hand was sliced. I don't even have use of my finger at all. Doesn't even move." But this scar is really more of a representation of where I've been healed, right? It's not where I've been hurt, it's where I've been healed. This scar is what makes me whole. So that's how we move from bleeding to building, just like this mindset shift, right? You can be looking at the injury, or you could be asking questions. How does this make me grow bigger? What's the wisdom that I can get from this? What's what's the paradigm shift that I'm going to grow from this? What other resources am I going to learn that are around me from being stressed under this whatever pressure I'm feeling, where I feel like everything is about everything, right? So there's all kinds of gifts and opportunities on the other side of that mindset shift, when it comes to bleeding out and moving from bleeding to building.
I love when you talked about scars because we all have them, right?
Yeah,
Most of us have this one under our chin. We've all hit that. We
yeah, yeah.
got them all over
That's,
our body. But what a great reminder to celebrate those. And those of you that have been a part of the Limitless Minds content for a while, we talk about adversity tolerance. And what
mm-hmm,
is that all about? It's the more you do hard things, the easier it becomes, right? But to have
mm,
courage and to look at those scars and see those in a different perspective, to be like, oh yeah, I've done this before, right? Like I
yeah,
can do hard things. Yeah, it kind of hurt and it was hard and there was a little pain involved, but I learned something on the other side of it. So
That's right.
I love that piece of it.
Yeah, and even also important, man. We need those lessons, right? Matt, I'm sure there's been times in your life where you're like, man, I wanted to walk through this door and it closed, but I'm glad it did because this other opportunity was way better, and now I'm doing these things and I'm connected to these people and I can make this kind of impact. And I thought that I wanted that, right? But we need pain. It's an opportunity for development, right? We need disconnection sometimes. How will we appreciate love without it, right? So the bleeding out is a part of the process. And that happens as soon as you accept that mindset that you're building and not bleeding, right?
And again, those of you tuning in, I know not everybody's a parent, but everybody's seen kids or have kids around them and so forth. I think as parents, when we because all of us are tuning in today, we wear a lot of different hats, right?
Yeah.
You and I have that dad hat on. It's the toughest thing we do, but letting our kids experience the struggle, right? Like I think the biggest shift I've seen with that is like swooping in and trying to make sure our kids don't experience those things, right? Because it is the hardest thing as a dad, mom, and so forth. But allowing them, we talk about scars. The bicycle's probably the first one, right? And so, but how do they learn? Well, they learn through, the tips over and the crashes and the things that, lead to that. And so I just want to remind people tuning in, not only as adults, but helping that circle of people around us. And I say that because those 6 kids that are running around your place, right? Like how to help them with that, because that's how they're going to be more successful. That's how they learn is through that process.
Yeah, Matt. So that hit me so hard because I thought, like I deal with that every day on some type of level, right now, 2 of my kids, they're doing a commercial, right? And they didn't need one of the other ones. She's old enough to be aware that, oh, I'm not being chosen right now. But I kind of had to just allow her to feel those emotions. And I can't take it away, right? Now, what helps us be able to hold that space for our kids is if we're operating in the same way, right? Am I looking at my own situations with that mindset? So, man, thanks for sharing that. That's huge.
So we'll end with this. Mari, if you don't mind putting that visual back up one more time. Our challenge to you today is this, to use the analogy. As you look at these areas, what is one that you're bleeding out, that you're struggling with, that you haven't give attention to, that you can, as we talked about today, apply that pressure, right?
Yeah.
Stop bleeding. Step 2, who's that person that you can lean on to say, hey, I want to do better here. What are some ideas you have for me? And just collaborate with somebody. And then the support system, right? What's the next step? And I think as room tilters and coaches and Hubert and I are dedicated to, it's exactly that. It's identifying what's going on. It's getting in your circle of what you have control over. And it's just taking that next step. And today, what we challenge you to do is pick one area, huddle up with somebody, call a 911, and take the next right step. So,
yeah, that's good. Thanks, man. That was awesome, man.
Well, Hubert, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time today, and everyone tuning in. Just want to remind everyone, we're here at Limitless Minds are here to support you any way that we can. Hope you make the choice to have a great rest of the week. And Hubert, we will see you soon.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Take care.